You know that guy in the office who always has a spreadsheet open? The one people joke about, but still ping at 7:58 a.m. because the board deck is due at 8? That was me. Name's Ethan, mid-30s, senior revenue analyst at a mid-sized SaaS company, with big ambitions and a bigger ego. My title sounded boring on paper, but in reality, I had my hands on everything that turned into money. Contracts, renewals, churn reports, discount approvals, revenue recognition schedules. If sales closed it, finance booked it, and I made sure the story in the slide deck matched the numbers in the system. 3 people actually understood our revenue engine: the CFO, the VP of sales, and me. My job was simple in theory: make sure what we told investors matched what we billed customers. In practice, it was like working as a translator between 2 people who lied in different languages. Sales lied in optimism, finance lied in interpretations. I tried to keep both from turning into fraud. I didn't start out cynical. When I joined, we were 30 people in a cramped office with secondhand chairs and bad coffee. The CEO brought donuts when we shipped a feature. We celebrated 10K deals like we'd won the lottery. Back then, my spreadsheets were just tools, not weapons. Then the money got bigger. So did the pressure. We signed our first 7-figure annual contract with a healthcare client, then another one with a logistics platform. We hired a VP of sales from a real tech company, and she brought with her a vocabulary full of quarterly narrative, pipeline optics, and stretch commitments. Her name was Melissa. She liked walking around with her AirPods in, talking loudly enough that every conversation sounded important. In her first all hands, she said, "If the numbers don't look good, we don't change the story. We change the numbers we're looking at." People laughed. I didn't, because I knew exactly which numbers she was about to start looking at. It started small. A renewal that came in on April 2nd accidentally counted in Q1. A 1-year contract magically became 2 on a slide, because they'll renew anyway. A discount that was supposed to be one time turned into a launch incentive we conveniently forgot to mention in the gross margin slide. Every time I pushed back, my manager, Carl, would put on his good cop face. "Ethan, you're right in principle," he'd say, closing my laptop a little too gently. "But we're playing at a different level now. Investors don't want every gritty detail. They want direction." "I'm not changing direction," I'd answer. "I'm just refusing to redraw the map." He'd sigh, pat my shoulder, and say the line I grew to hate: "Pick your battles." I did. And I picked this one. I started keeping copies. Not in some secret offshore server or anything dramatic. Just clean exports of the revenue dashboards, month-end snapshots, and my email threads. All under the same boring naming convention. All dated. All sitting in my personal cloud archive that synced from my work laptop before I turned it off at night. I didn't think of it as leverage. I thought of it as self-defense. The breaking point came 8 months later, sitting in the CFO's glass office at 6:40 p.m. on a Tuesday. We were reviewing the preliminary numbers for Q3. Real numbers, actual invoices, actual contracts, actual cash. We were short. Not a disaster, but short enough that the growth story on the last investor deck would start to look like fiction. Melissa leaned back in her chair and said, like she was ordering takeout, "Can't we just pull forward the AccuNet renewal? We're negotiating terms anyway. Count it this quarter. Call it done." AccuNet's current contract runs through January, I reminded her. "We don't have signatures, and they're asking for a downgrade." "So give them a verbal that will honor a lower tier next year," she shot back. "We book the full renewal now. Clean it up in Q1. The street doesn't need every footnote." The CFO looked at me, not her, because he knew I was the one who actually had to touch the system. "Ethan?" I stared at the draft P&L on the screen. The wrong number was highlighted in green, waiting for me. "If I book that," I said slowly, "we're recognizing revenue on a contract that doesn't exist. That's not optics. That's misstatement. And if AccuNet downgrades later, we'll be restating revenue in a quarter, where we just told investors we nailed it. Melissa rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. No, I answered. I'm being accurate. The room went quiet. The CFO drummed his fingers once, twice. Then he smiled in a way I didn't like. Okay, he said. We're clearly not aligned on this. Melissa, I'll talk to you separately. Ethan, thanks. You can go. We'll figure out the presentation from here. That was the first time he'd ever dismissed me from a revenue meeting early. I walked back to my desk with that buzzing feeling in my ears you get right before a fire alarm. The next morning, my keycard still worked. The one after that, too. By the following week, the quarter closed. We beat expectations. I watched the earnings call transcript come in with numbers I recognized, and a guidance slide I didn't. We're seeing strong renewal momentum across enterprise accounts, especially in healthcare, Melissa said, voice bright. Customers are expanding their footprint. I knew for a fact that 3 of those expanding customers had open tickets asking for downsell options. I started drafting an internal memo. Clean. Factual. No adjectives. Subject line, concerns about revenue recognition and renewal reporting. I never got to send it, because 3 days later at 8:03 a.m., my badge turned red at the lobby turnstile, and the guard said the words that would change everything. Sorry, man, you're not in the system anymore. That was the last morning I tried to walk into that building as an employee, but it was the first morning I realized something important. My access to the office was gone. My access to the truth wasn't. The lobby guard looked more uncomfortable than I did. He scanned my badge again, like maybe the computer had made a moral mistake. Same red flash, same dull beep. Probably an HR thing, he offered. Maybe they're reissuing badges. He didn't believe that. Neither did I. 2 minutes later, HR answered the question. Ethan? A woman in a navy blazer stepped out of the elevator bank. I recognized her from compliance trainings and awkward holiday speeches. Karen, Director of People Operations. Can you come upstairs for a moment? She asked, and the phrasing was polite. The security guy walking into the elevator behind us was not. In the small conference room on the 12th floor, the script unfolded the way these things always do. We've decided to go in a different direction with the revenue org. Your role has been restructured. This isn't about performance. They slid an envelope across the table. Severance, NDA, mutual non-disparagement. 3 weeks' salary for 7 years of work, as long as I promised to pretend nothing had happened. I flipped through the pages while Karen talked in a soft, sorry, we killed your dog tone. There's also a clause here about company property, she said. Laptop, access cards, any files. What about my bonus? I interrupted. She blinked. What bonus? The Q3 performance bonus that was in my offer letter, I said. The one tied to clean audits and on-time closes. We've had both every quarter. She glanced at the CFO through the glass wall. He was on a call, staring at his monitor. Bonuses are discretionary, she said carefully, given the organizational changes. So you beat guidance, I summarized. You keep your jobs, I keep my principles, and I lose my bonus. Karen shifted in her chair. The package is actually above market for someone who doesn't know what's in the filings, I finished for her. She didn't deny it. Instead, she slid a second form toward me. We do need to disable your access today, she added. IT will collect your laptop. Security will escort you to clean out your desk. There it was. Not even a pretense of transition support. I signed the acknowledgement of receipt. Not the NDA. Not the severance agreement. Not yet. Ethan, Karen said as I stood, I hope you'll remember the good years. I remember the numbers, I replied. They don't change because you cut a badge. Security walked me through the open office past people pretending not to stare. Carl popped his head over his monitor, did a small, helpless shrug, and stayed seated. Melissa didn't even look up. I dropped my laptop on IT's counter like it was a dead animal. Sorry, man, the tech whispered. I got the request 10 minutes ago. It's not on you, I said. Just wipe it clean. You'll sleep better than they will. At my desk, I filled a single cardboard box, coffee mug, 2 notebooks, a framed photo my sister had given me. I left the branded hoodie on the back of my chair. It belonged to their story now. I didn't. As security walked me to the elevator, Melissa stepped out of a huddle room and finally made eye contact. "Nothing personal," she said too brightly. "Sometimes orgs need fresh perspectives." "On the numbers?" I asked. She smiled like she hadn't heard me. "It's just business." That sentence should be printed on biohazard bags. In the parking garage, the guard nodded at me like a funeral attendee. I put the box in the passenger seat, sat behind the wheel, and just breathed. Anger was there, sure, but mostly I felt something else. Clarity. They thought they'd taken everything that mattered away. Desk, laptop, badge, salary. They forgot that for 7 years, I was the one who downloaded, cleaned, and archived every revenue report before it went to their story slides. They hadn't taken those copies. They couldn't. When I got home, I opened my personal laptop. The little cloud icon spun happily in the corner, sinking like it didn't know anything had changed. I opened a folder titled Month-End Snapshots. 7 years of history stared back at me in neat, time-stamped rows. Real invoices, real renewals, real churn. And then I opened the last 3 months. The gap between real and reported looked like a canyon. Discounts that mysteriously vanished from margin. Contracts counted in full before signatures. Renewals booked at full price when the actual invoices, sitting right there in another export, showed one-time marketing credits that wiped out half the revenue. I stared at my own spreadsheets and realized something obvious I hadn't wanted to admit. I hadn't been picky. I'd been right. And they hadn't just pushed back. They'd removed the one person in the building who still treated the numbers like facts instead of suggestions. For about 5 minutes, I considered doing nothing, taking the severance, signing the NDA, filing this away under lessons learned, and finding another job where people would tell me I was too rigid until the next crisis. But anger isn't what moved me. Fear did. Because if those numbers ever blew up, my name would still be on the old audit trails, prepared by Ethan Cole. I wasn't going to let someone else's gambles sink my future. So instead of signing their NDA, I opened another file, the company's code of ethics, still available from the public website. There it was, in dry legal language, the whistleblower policy, the confidential hotline, the direct email for the audit committee of the board. I read every line carefully. Then I started drafting a different kind of report. Not for my manager, not for the CFO. For the people whose signatures actually went under, "We believe these financial statements are fairly presented." I thought getting fired was the end of my story with that company. Turned out, it was just the introduction. And the numbers were about to tell a version of events Melissa couldn't spin away. I did not become some Hollywood hacker overnight. I didn't break into anything I didn't need to. Everything I used, I'd had legitimate access to while I was employed. Month-end revenue exports, contract lists, the email thread where I'd raised concerns about early recognition and creative renewals. They were already sitting in my personal archive, synced automatically from my work laptop over the last few years. No passwords stolen, no systems breached. All I did now was open my own files and look at them with a different question in mind. Not, how do we make this look good? But, what would an auditor see if they weren't trying to impress anyone? For 3 straight days, my apartment looked like a small war room. Printouts on the table, sticky notes with dates and contract IDs, highlighters bleeding through paper. I built a simple timeline. On one side, actual contracts and invoices. On the other, what we'd reported in internal decks and external guidance. Patterns emerged like bruises. At Q1, a major logistics client signs a downgrade for the next term. Invoices show a 30% reduction. The board deck still shows them as expanding logo. Q2, a healthcare client gets a one-time implementation credit that wipes out their entire first quarter's bill. Revenue report calls it full ARR recognized. Q3, the AccuNet renewal that sparked our argument shows up in an internal revenue forecast as closed won at list price before the new contract even exists. Side by side, it stopped looking like optimism and started looking like a scheme. Every time the quarter looked soft, someone added a timing adjustment that magically moved revenue from the future into the present. Every time a client demanded concessions, the discounts were tucked under vague labels that vanished when numbers rolled up. It wasn't one mistake. It was a habit. And I'd already tried the polite route, pushing back in meetings, flagging issues in email, suggesting we bring in external auditors for comfort. The response had been consistent. Stop making noise. Now they'd remove me entirely. That was their choice. What I did next was mine. On Friday morning, I booked an appointment with an employment lawyer. A real one, not a friend of a friend who kinda does contracts. Her name was Olivia. Her office overlooked a boring part of downtown. Good sign. The view was spreadsheets, not yachts. So, she said, clicking her pen, tell me what happened. Start with when it stopped feeling right. I walked her through the last year. The pushes, the direction, the AccuNet conversation, getting my badge cut, the NDA with its soft threats about disparagement. Then I slid the stack of printouts across her desk. These are exports from our internal systems, I said, month-end revenue and contract data. This is what we actually build. I pulled out the board decks, and this is what we presented as revenue and pipeline to investors. Olivia flipped through the pages slowly, lips pressing into a thin line. These are your exports? She asked. Yes, prepared by me while I was employed. These emails, I tapped the printed threads, show me raising concerns about recognizing revenue early, hiding discounts, and mislabeling downgrades. She turned one page, read, and looked up. And they fired you 3 days after you refused to book that AccuNet renewal early? Yes? She leaned back in her chair and let out a breath through her nose. Okay, she said. 2 things. First, you were absolutely right to refuse. Second, this is bigger than an employment dispute. I don't want to go to prison because someone else wanted a better stock price, I said. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for distance and protection. Olivia nodded once. You may also be looking at a whistleblower situation, she said. There are protections for that, and potential awards if regulators recover money because of your information. I don't care about an award. That's fine, she said, but you do care about not being the scapegoat when this blows up, which it will if the gap between real and reported keeps growing. She stood, pulled a slim binder from a shelf, and set it on the desk. This is the process, she said. We document what you have. We secure it properly. We file with the appropriate regulator. We also send a confidential letter to the audit committee at your old company. Once they know, they are on the hook to act. If they don't, that's on them. And my NDA? I asked. She smiled without humor. You didn't sign it. Even if you had, it wouldn't prevent you from reporting potential fraud to regulators. Those clauses aren't enforceable in that context. For the first time since the badge beeped red, my shoulders dropped a fraction. It wasn't joy. It was relief. Like someone had finally said, You're not crazy. The building is actually on fire. We spent 2 hours organizing what I had. Files, dates, names, exact statements I'd heard in meetings, no embellishment, just facts. At the end, she slid a blank legal pad toward me. Tonight, I want you to write down everything you remember from those key conversations, she said. Word for word where you can. Who was in the room? Who said what? Times and dates, if you have them. Memory fades faster than documents. Then what? I asked. Then, she said, we give the numbers a new audience. I walked out of her office into late afternoon light, feeling something new. Not just anger, not just fear. Resolve. They'd cut my access badge like that would end my involvement. Instead, they'd remove the last person who might have kept this in-house. They pushed the story outside the building. The numbers didn't care who they made uncomfortable. And for the first time, neither did I. The formal complaint went in 3 weeks later. By then, I'd written 27 pages in longhand, filling in the gaps around the spreadsheets. Dates, meeting rooms, phrases etched into my memory. We can always clean it up next quarter. No one needs to know the exact discount structure. Investors don't want messy reality. They want the big picture. Olivia's team turned my notes and exports into something colder, a structured packet with headings like pattern of premature revenue recognition and failure to disclose material discounts. We filed it with the regulator. We also sent a confidential letter via certified mail to the chair of the audit committee and the independent director listed in the company's proxy filing. It was dry, clinical, devastating. Then, nothing. At least, nothing I could see. Weeks went by. I went to the gym. I applied for jobs. I cooked bland meals and found out how quiet an apartment could be without Slack notifications and quick questions. I started to think maybe this would all die in some inbox. Then the calls started, not to me, to them. On a Thursday morning, Ray, an engineer friend who still worked there, texted. "Anything you want to tell me?" he wrote. "About what?" I replied. "We just got an all-hands invite," he said. "Mandatory. 9:30 a.m. CFO, CEO, audit chair. Subject, financial controls update." My heart did a slow, heavy thud. At 9:32, he sent another text. "Dude, they look like they haven't slept in a week." I put my phone face down on the table and forced myself not to call him. I wasn't going to be the guy live tweeting a crash he'd helped set in motion. 2 hours later, a different number lit up my phone. Unknown, I let it go to voicemail. An email came through instead to the address Olivia had used for filings, from an assistant to the audit committee chair. "Dear Mr. Cole, the audit committee of company name would like to schedule a time to speak with you regarding certain matters recently brought to our attention." I forwarded it to Olivia. She called me within 5 minutes. "They're moving," she said. "Fast. That's good. It means your complaint hit nerves that already felt raw." We scheduled a joint call. Me, Olivia, the committee chair, and outside counsel from a firm whose name I recognized from financial news. I expected hostility. What I got was something more unsettling, concern, not for me, for themselves. "Mr. Cole," the chair began, "we've reviewed the materials you sent. We're taking this very seriously. We've engaged independent forensic accountants to examine the revenue recognition practices you described." "Good," I said. "They're not going to like what they find." There was a pause. "You understand," outside counsel cut in, "that we're not here to discuss individual personnel decisions or your separation." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm not here for my job back. I'm here to make sure your filings match reality, so I don't get dragged into something I refuse to participate in." The call lasted an hour. They asked detailed questions, dates, names, who was in which meeting, when I'd first raised concerns, how the internal controls were supposed to work, versus how they actually did. I answered every one. At the end, the chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole," he said, "whatever your feelings toward management, we appreciate you bringing this to us. We will be in touch." I hung up feeling oddly hollow. I'd handed the numbers over. Now they weren't mine anymore. They were evidence. That's when the chaos started to spill out of the building. Ray texted me again a week later. "We just lost access to half the revenue dashboards," he wrote. "Read only, even for managers." Another day. "CFO just took a leave of absence." Official email. Then, "We're delaying earnings. They're saying additional review." Publicly, the company put out a bland press release, a delay in filing due to review of certain revenue recognition practices. The stock dipped, then dropped. Inside, according to Ray, it was worse. "People are freaking out," he messaged. They're saying investigators are camped out in conference rooms pulling emails. Melissa looks like she hasn't slept in days. Part of me felt a sharp, sour satisfaction. Part of me felt sick, because this was never just about Melissa or the CFO. It was about dozens of ordinary employees who trusted the numbers they were given, numbers I used to protect. On a cold Monday morning, my phone buzzed with an email that made both parts of me go quiet. It was from the company's outside counsel. Mr. Cole, we would like to inform you that the company intends to restate its revenue for the past 3 quarters. The audit committee's investigation has substantiated certain concerns you raised. The company acknowledges that some of your objections to prior practices were valid and should have been addressed at the time. There it was, in careful legal language. You were right. We were wrong. We are now paying for it. Olivia read the email twice. This is big, she said. They're basically admitting that your concerns were real and that they ignored them. That's leverage. Not just for your own protection, potentially for compensation. I don't want to profit off a mess that's going to hurt employees, I said. You already lost your job because you refused to create that mess, she replied. There's a difference between setting a fire and getting paid for having pulled the alarm. We filed an addendum with the regulator, documenting the company's own admissions. A week later, news broke publicly. Revenue restatements, executive resignations, material weaknesses in internal controls. The stock dropped again. Text messages from former coworkers flooded in. Now I get why they rushed you out, one wrote. I'm sorry I didn't back you in that meeting, another said. I thought you were just being rigid. Turns out you were the only adult in the room. It felt good, not in a fireworks way, in a quiet, vindicating way. They cut my badge, they cut my salary. They even tried to cut my voice, but they couldn't cut the truth out of the revenue numbers. Those were still talking, and now the right people were finally listening. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't, because once the chaos settled, someone else reached out, someone who wasn't trying to control the damage, someone who saw an opportunity in a guy who refused to move numbers to match a story. The email came from a personal Gmail address with a subject line that sounded like spam. Quick conversation, I think we're aligned. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the signature line at the bottom. Daniel Ross, Managing Partner, Northbridge Capital. Northbridge was one of the smaller funds that had invested in my old company's Series C. I remembered the name from cap table slides. Mr. Cole, the email began, I sit on several boards, including one you're intimately familiar with. Let me be blunt. People talk. Your name has come up in a good way in conversations about what went wrong, he went on. I'd like to buy you a coffee. Not to ask you for secrets, I know better than that, but to understand how someone in your role saw what very expensive people missed, or chose not to see. Olivia looked at the email, then at me. You can say no, she said. You're not obligated to help him clean up their mess. I know, I replied, but I'm tired of only being valuable as a warning. We met at a neutral spot, a quiet cafe nowhere near my old office. Daniel was mid-40s, wore an expensive watch and cheap sneakers, and asked direct questions. You were what, senior revenue analyst? He said, stirring his coffee. No VP title. No equity package worth losing sleep over. You still risked your job by pushing back. Why? Because numbers don't care about titles, I said. If they're wrong, they're wrong. And if you sign off on them, the regulator doesn't care how much stock you had when you did it. He smiled. Fair answer. Now let me tell you why I'm here. He explained that Northbridge had taken a hit on the restatement, but not a fatal one. They'd diversified. It stung, though, and he was now a lot more interested in companies that built real controls instead of pretty dashboards. I sit on the board of a B2B payments company, he said. You've never heard of them. They don't want to become your last employer. They want to build it right before someone like you has to blow a whistle. He slid a business card across the table. They need a head of revenue integrity, Their words, not mine. Someone who understands systems, but more importantly, understands where the pressure points are. Someone who's already proven they won't cave when it counts. I stared at the card. "You're offering me a job because I helped tank your investment," I said. He shook his head. "I'm offering you a job because you refuse to help tank it further," he replied. "Trust me, that distinction matters in my world." We talked for an hour, not about salacious details, about process, controls, what I'd do differently if I could design a revenue system from scratch. A week later, after a proper interview loop with actual executives, I got an offer. It wasn't glamorous. No corner office. The title was accurate instead of impressive. The salary was solid. The equity was modest. The autonomy was real. "Take your time," the new CFO said on the final call. "We want you focused on building guardrails, not making slides look pretty." I accepted. On my first day at the new company, they handed me a badge. The irony wasn't lost on me. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of the plastic. "Don't worry," the office manager joked. "If you leave, we'll deactivate this one without escorting you out like a criminal." "You have no idea how low that bar is," I answered. My new work looked a lot like the old work at first glance. Spreadsheets, systems, contracts. But the tone was different. When I flagged a potential issue in how they were recognizing implementation fees, the CFO didn't roll his eyes. He asked, "Oh, what do you recommend?" We implemented a policy, documented it, moved on, no drama. Meanwhile, my old company faded from my day-to-day life and settled into the background noise of financial news. They filed their restatements. The CFO resigned. Melissa pursued new opportunities. There were class action press releases, shareholder lawsuits, and carefully worded apologies. I read them once. Then I closed the tabs. I had my own numbers to care about. Sometimes, on the train home, I'd scroll back to the photo I'd taken of the badge access denied screen on that last morning. The little red bar, the generic error message. It used to make me angry. Now it just felt accurate. They'd cut my access to a building where my principals weren't welcome. They'd locked me out of rooms where numbers were props, not facts. Good. I didn't belong there anymore. At home, there's a small hook by my front door. My new badge hangs there next to my keys. In the morning, I grab both without thinking about whether the ground under my feet is real. My coffee tastes better. My sleep is heavier. My spreadsheets tell stories that line up with invoices instead of fantasies. People sometimes ask if I ever regret what I did, if I wish I'd just gone along, booked the numbers, kept the job, and let someone else worry about the fallout. Here's the thing. They cut my access badge. They thought they were cutting me off from power. What they actually did was cut themselves off from the one person in the building who believed revenue was more than a story. They forgot I still had access to the numbers. And in the end, the numbers answered for me far louder than I ever could have in a meeting. That's the part that lets me sleep. Not that they paid. Not that I landed on my feet. But that the story ended where it always should have. With the truth in black and white on a page someone had to sign.